Quality Digest Live. Changes are afoot at Quality Digest.
And is perception reality? All that and more back in a moment.
This week on Quality Digest Live, we celebrate our 5th anniversary. That's right, 5 years.
That's right. We're going to...
It's a very special episode.
It is a very special episode. We're very excited. We're going to look back and we're going to look forward at what's changed and what hasn't changed in our industry over these past 5 years. So that and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
And welcome back to Quality Digest Live for April 29th, 2011.
No. You're wrong.
I'm wrong. It's 2016. That's right.
You did that intentionally.
I did. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
Yes, he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Well, we're having some fun on the show today because, Dirk, it was exactly 5 years ago today.
Yes, it was.
April 29th, as he mentions, 2011, and not 2016, 2011, that we began this journey into the unknown that we like to call Quality Digest Live. Our 5-year mission: to explore strange new processes, to seek out new tools and new methodologies, to boldly go where no one has gone before. You know, they used to say where no man has gone before. They changed that to no one.
Yeah.
They got very much less sexist as Star Trek went along in their generations. But
yeah. Of course, the first Star Trek was like nothing but women in really short skirts. So I mean,
great show.
It was a great show.
Well, you know, as you can see, we're nothing if not overly dramatic. We reach for the stars here on Quality Digest Live, analogy to Star Trek. But yes, these 5 years have actually seen a number of important industry-changing trends, perspectives, and events since 2011. And we've been fortunate enough to be right here pretty much every Friday afternoon to share them with you over that period of time. You know, when we launched the show, we occupied our previous offices. There was no studio as we have right here, right now. So we just kind of set up in one of our central offices. You could see it there in that opening clip.
It wasn't an office.
It was kind of
a hallway.
Hallway that we set up. We let it rip. We hoped that a stray train didn't roll by outside.
Which it did.
Which it did on occasion. If you go back at some of those early shows, you'll hear Dirk and I saying, "Is that a train?" That's a train, yeah, and it was. Well, as you can see in this first clip, Dirk and I, at the time, were definitely a little bit younger and maybe just a little bit more casual as well. So let's play this first clip from the show back then.
Welcome to Quality Digest Live for April 29th, 2011. Quality Digest Live is a weekly live webcast that discusses some of this week's top stories and story makers. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief for Quality Digest.
And I'm Mike Richmond, publisher. I love it. You know, you can't see it in that shot. I think you were actually wearing flip-flops in that Dirk, were you? You were kind of out of shot back there. Not, as opposed to his nice sneakers he's wearing now.
Yes, exactly.
Yay, we finally got the sneakers in shot. Well, the first article that we covered on that day's show was titled "Being Comfortable in a World of Never-Ending Change." I think that was appropriate since we ourselves were in the midst of some major changes at the time, and not the least of which was really the introduction of the show itself, right? I mean, you think about everything we were doing at the time, which we weren't doing right before then. That show was really a hallmark of what the change really was for us in doing that. And I actually want to show you another clip, if I can, right now, talking about that first story and what the intention of the show was.
My story on change management, being comfortable in a world of never-ending change, which appeared in the premiere issue of the new Quality Digest Daily on Monday, April 26th. Well, change management, of course, is something we cover here, and it's an important function for everyone out there and everyone in here, whether you're in manufacturing or service industries or media, as we are.
What are you, like 17 years old in that thing? Man.
You know, you haven't changed at all. But when I look back on that, you know what I think?
That you're really young?
That I've really got to shave. I think the beard has had it, man. I got to get rid of this thing. Well, change management was, of course, a big topic then. It continues to be important for all of us here, as it was then. Change, of course, means growth, and growth means improvement. I think it's safe to say that change management is really the core tenet of the quality function. I think that's probably fair to say. And for those of us in media especially, change has really been truly the only constant that we've had here over the past couple of years. It's affected us in many significant ways. In May of 2009, we shipped the last printed issue of Quality Digest. And at that time, we also, as you remember, Dirk, we were going through a lot of meetings at the time. We beefed up our website and we launched Quality Digest Daily version 1.0. We had already dabbled in a lot of live video at that point. We had done some Technorazi Lives. We had done a news desk format, which was similar in some ways to Quality Digest Daily. We had done a few things, but we really committed to it at that time with, I think as well, regular broadcasts of QDL. That was really a core thing of what we were doing. We said, well, if we're going to be different, if we're not going to be in print anymore, what are we going to do to bring something different and maybe a little special to our audience? And that was your idea. Your and Chris Smith's idea was, let's do a live show.
I'm so smart.
You were smart,
Still old.
Still old, but still smart. Well, later during that same report, I mentioned some new stuff that we were planning to roll out as part of our changes. And I want to show one more clip that kind of talks about some of those.
So we really looked at everything, and I want to emphasize this isn't the end of our change management process. QDD is the beginning of an ongoing process of change, but we're also doing a new enhanced webinar program that people will see very soon.
And obviously this program that you're watching right now.
QDL, Quality Digest Live.
QDL.
No.
Sorry. I was seeing
myself.
I was like, wow.
I'm supposed to talk now.
Is that me or is that me in Memorex 5 years ago? I look so similar. Who would know? Right? Well, as you can see from that clip, QDL figured prominently, as I mentioned, in everything we were doing. But I also teased something that was really cool, a brand new at the time, enhanced webinar program, which I'm proud to say has brought you some of the most interesting, useful, and advanced webinar presentations in the industry. Of course, I'm not biased at all when I say that. But I wrapped up the piece by talking about the results of a survey that we did at the time, and we've done several since, surveying you and asking you what you thought. And that survey brought out some really surprising results that we commented on. So let's run this last clip of my segment here.
And by the way, I will add that as much as we value the feedback from our readers, there is also a certain amount where we want to push our readership. And so there are articles that we will include that we believe are relevant to our industry, even though they may seem on the fringe. And there actually is a rhyme and a reason to why we do some of this stuff.
So Dirk, would you agree that we're still seeking to push, you said push our audience at that point. You think we're still seeking to really push our audience in terms of what we think they should be reading versus what they will read all the time? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about what we think they should be reading. I think what we've done, and Taryn March, our editorial director, what we've tried to do is say, okay, look, if you work in this field, you're dealing with more than just strictly quality issues. You're dealing, or at least some of our audience are dealing with technology issues. They're dealing with, supply chain issues. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of things that are sometimes tangential to quality, but still in some way related. And so we've really, I think, vastly expanded what the idea of quality is about. And I will say that, I mean, we can tell from our readership, the readership still sends, in terms of what they read, they tend to be still very focused on the traditional quality issues. But we still see a fair amount of traction on articles that are related to things that NIST is doing in terms of new developments in test and measurement, or things that are happening in supply chain, or robotics, or 3D printing. Strictly tied into quality? No, but still it is of interest to our readership, and we want them to have a broader base of what they're learning. So they're not surprised by what's going on in robotics, because robotics are working their way into all forms in all areas of manufacturing and service. So why should the quality engineer not know about some of the stuff that's coming down the pike? Whether it relates to them right now or not doesn't matter. At some point it's going to. So we think it's information that should be out there.
Well, it's also it also speaks to the purpose of a media company and the purpose of a B2B media company like Quality Digest. You know, you're there to hopefully educate and give people something that directly applies to what they're doing, but you also want to just present good, interesting content. And I mean, I think all of us as interested just readers of content all the time read a wide variety of things. It doesn't have to always be, even though we're Quality Digest Daily, we I think have made a very conscious decision that we want to broaden it. We want to have interesting articles, yes, that are based in science, that are based in technology, that are based in industry, but also push the envelope. And maybe that a quality manager doesn't necessarily do that every day for his or her living, but is just going to be interested in it. Because we find if we get the eyeballs, it's going to be better for all of us. It's going to be better for our marketing partners too. So these are the decisions that came out of this whole change management thing that we launched then. We had been launching for a few years before then. It's really interesting when I look back and listen to that episode again, how needs and us internally who decide what we think is important too.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because some things change a little, some things change a lot. And one story that, the second story actually that we ran on that episode was on perceptions and how our reliance on appearances, physical appearances of somebody's workspace or of themselves can really mislead us when it comes to judging a person or their work. And we've got a clip here that kind of outlines some of that. We all have coworkers that we've worked with where when we first met them, we were maybe a little put off. The example she uses is a person who's very heavily tattooed. You know, you've seen the guy or maybe the gal come in, they got the full sleeve tattoo and they got tattoos on their necks. Maybe they got a lot of body piercings. Did I say necks? Did I say tattoos? Tattoos on their necks? Well, I guess if you're big enough, some people have multiple necks, you know, but
well, you know what I noticed?
Tattoos on your necks, man.
You know what I noticed is as much as we might run down that old set, those were some beautiful French doors we had back there. Did you see those?
Awesome.
They were all over the place.
In our hallway.
That was pretty cool. I like that.
Now, that particular segment went on to say how we might draw a conclusion that that person is brash or uncouth or maybe even uneducated. When it's possible that none of that is true at all. On the other hand, we might assume that a clean-cut looking person, you know, like Mike used to look back then, with an immaculate desk is on top of their game. They're organized or a good worker. That also might not be true. But what I find really interesting, because we mentioned body piercings and tattoos in that little clip, what I find really interesting is that more and more, and as a matter of fact, I just ran across a promotional video just the other day from a major metrology company. Now we're seeing is that more and more, particularly in high-end equipment, the male models that are demonstrating the equipment have multiple earrings. Now, 5 years ago, it was almost unheard of to see a guy in a video wearing anything with other than kind of short, at least not very long hair, and certainly no earrings. And now you'll see, good-looking male models demonstrating equipment. They might have ponytails, they might have earrings in both ears, or multiple earrings in one ear, and stuff. And it's just funny. I mean, it's even in just 5 years' time, the look of the workforce has changed, and now it's pretty much accepted. It's kind of like the young people the newer generations that come in kind of take over from the older generations, and they bring their own ideas of what is acceptable and I think this is a key word, accessible.
Well, and it's important that you say that, because I think this is an issue in our industry of this workforce blending together, where you do have a graying workforce and you have people coming in and like you say, perceptions of what's appropriate or what a good worker is supposed to look like. Well, on both ends, on the younger end and on the older end, both groups have to kind of bend a little bit to say, well, let's judge this person by their work, by their output, by what they do, not by what they necessarily look like. So that's an important part of it too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Finally, the last segment on the show was we took a look at some technology. And this was a tech corner on a product called Factory Scribe, which was a really kind of an ingenious device that allowed you to write on paper and have what you wrote be electronically recorded. Here's a clip. So Factory Scribe has got this cool little product. We'll switch to the webcam here. And as I said, you've got a pen here. However, this pen has got a camera. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a camera embedded in the tip of this pen. And this worksheet is actually covered with very fine a 2D dot matrix that is unique on every section of this page. So that was pretty ingenious. And if you think about the purpose of that was to kind of bridge that gap from paper to electronic documents. And the problem, this product didn't really take off. And I think the problem was this was 2011. That was an issue, paper, how do you do electronic, paper stuff, audit lists and checklists and so forth on the factory floor and have it be electronic. And that was kind of one of the solutions, and it was actually a really cool solution. But at that time, you were starting to see cell phone apps that would allow you to do that on your cell phone. I think if that product had come out 5 years earlier, it would have been dynamite, because before that, there really weren't all that many, let's say, apps that were industrial apps used on the shop floor. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Here was a really clever solution that worked really well, but it kind of came out at the same time as electronic, document control and stuff on your cell phone. So
yeah, which kind of subsumed. The need for it not as great, but it was an ingenious product at the time.
The thing that's interesting, how some things never change, as we talk about this all the time. Matter of fact, we'll probably talk about it in the webinar
coming up next week.
Oh, actually, yeah, exactly. People are still using paper and pencil on the factory floor.
That's right.
I mean, it hasn't really gone away, even with all the technology that's out there. It's kind of interesting. So, I mean, there's you look at what was going on 5 years ago in 2011, and you look at what's going on today in 2016, and there have been a lot of things that haven't changed much, but there's been a lot of things that have happened that weren't really talked about all that much. That, I mean, obviously within the last couple of years, we've been talking about the Internet of Things, and it's not that it didn't exist in 2011. It's just it hadn't reached the kind of the saturation point that it is right now. But everything is connected, and because everything is connected, all this data is flying all over the place, including your cell phone app. That you take out onto the factory floor.
Well, where I saw that was we've done a lot of work with the Ford Motor Company, where Ford's representatives have come on the show. We've interviewed them, and we've run a lot of content in Quality Digest Daily too. And it really kind of the dime drop for me when I went to a Ford event, and they were referring to themselves as a personal mobility company, I believe, an informational mobility.
We're not a transportation or an auto company.
No, we're an information company that happens to be mobile, and that was like, okay, it's a different perspective on that, and a car is involved in the Internet of Things. I mean, that's part of a thing that's connected to everything else. And as we go forward, now we have self-driving cars. Self-driving cars in 2011 was still really in the realm of science fiction. I mean, I don't think we started talking about that even as a possibility until a year or two ago, right? I mean, it was like, wow, we're seeing the science fiction become science fact so quickly in these few years that we've been doing this, right? It's really amazing to see that. Internet of Things. Big data is another thing. I mean, the idea that you would have so much data that you would need to have strategies to manage it and begin to extract out of it. It was all like, in the past, get data, bring data.
And now it's like,
oh my gosh, don't bring so much data.
What do we do with it?
I mean, these are things that were hard to anticipate, I think, even as short as 5 years ago.
And there's been some things that have happened that are the result of events. And I think of, say, supply chain management. Supply chain management has been around for a long time. We've talked about it a lot. We were talking about it a little bit back then. But it has really come to the fore in the last few years. And maybe a lot of that driven by Fukushima.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's funny because we both talked about this, and we both assumed Fukushima was not quite as long ago as it was. Fukushima actually happened a month before our first show. Fukushima happened, the earthquake and the tsunami happened in March of 2011. Now, at the time, of course, it was a great disaster, and there was the cleanup that was going on in the nuclear reactor and everything else.
And that was actually the focus. That was the nuclear radiation, and of course the tsunami, and the human tragedy.
Which was, and it certainly is. But what we didn't appreciate, and I think the industry didn't appreciate until a little bit of time later, maybe even into 2012, was the fact that, gosh, this is a humongous supply chain disruption. And the idea that industry wasn't really prepared, especially in electronics and automotive, for disruption in that area. It's a very key area of the global supply chain there in northern Japan, and there wasn't a lot of preparation to deal with that potential disruption. And that tied into this element of risk, and is there an appreciation for risk? And managing supply chain, understanding risk, are very analogous things these days, not necessarily in 2011. They are much more so now, I think, than they were then.
Yeah, and you think about it is almost any time we do a webinar on risk management,
right,
everybody talks about a Fukushima event.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of like, yeah, I mean, if you have a Fukushima event, how are you going to deal with it? You know, and the other thing that was interesting to me about looking back on, say, Fukushima and what that caused, that was a huge event, but, you know, you look at years earlier, 10 years earlier, you had Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, which in terms of the size of the impact and the number of people displaced and all that was probably much bigger. But that wasn't an area that had a whole lot of impact on industry and supply chain. So it's not like these events are new. They aren't. We have major catastrophes all the time. But this was maybe the first time that you had one that directly impacted something that was such a critical nexus of a supply chain.
And I think that whole idea, that seeping into the consciousness of the fact that supply chains are inherently risky and that you need to understand what your risks really are, I think kickstarted in a lot of ways this idea of risk management as an outgrowth of quality. And quality and risk had some associations that needed to be considered. And of course, what we saw in ISO 9001 2015, which we've been talking about now for well over a year, really more than a year, since really the first drafts of the 2015 version came out, was this idea of risk-based thinking that now is brought into ISO 9001 as a part and parcel of what the standard is about. Managers need to understand risks. They need to be able to at least address, at least to think in those ways, and in things like the supply chain. Well, of course, if this were to happen, what systems do you have in place to deal with it? Do you have alternative suppliers? Do you have alternative ways of constructing your product so that you don't need that particular part or product, whatever it may be? That wasn't really as much of a thought, I think, 5 years ago, and I think it's codified now in 2015's version of ISO 9001, right. and there's certainly been a lot of controversy about it. We've certainly talked about it a lot on the show and in QDD, that it's controversial, but I think it's here to stay, and I think that idea of risk is something that we're going to be dealing with a lot.
Another thing that's changed, obviously, over 5 years is, well, age. I mean, you saw those pictures. Mike was a lot younger, and I looked about the same. But, I mean, if you talk about two big topics, is dealing with millennials in the workplace. They come in with a kind of a different perspective and a different viewpoint, and also the grain of the workplace, kind of the skills gap and the wage gap, as you have seasoned knowledge workers retiring and very often taking their skill sets with them, and the impact that has on the workplace and how that has to be dealt with. How do you mine that tribal knowledge and let it become corporate knowledge? How do you integrate that into the company before these people leave? And also, how do you have these skills be introduced at an earlier age through education and so forth, so that there isn't this so-called skills gap for the younger workforce entering in, the younger generation graduated from college entering the workforce with the skills that they need.
Even studying STEM education well before they graduate in the high school and even the grade school level, to begin to introduce STEM education, so that we have a better chance of developing engineers and people that can do these jobs. And closely tied to that really is this idea of a wage gap. Is there or is there not a wage gap, as something we talked about on the show also over these past year or two? We've seen things like, or we've heard things like, like there'll be an ad for an experienced welder, right, who has a certain level of skills and a master's degree for $18 an hour.
Right.
And you look at that, you're like, well, gosh, it's like, well, I know it's an apprentice welder, it's not like a master welder, but still it's like, well, that doesn't seem like a heck of a lot of money, right? I mean, $18 an hour, depending on where you are in the country, can be pretty good. But I mean, for what they want, maybe they're not offering enough. Yeah. And the industry maybe has to take some of this on as well. I mean, it's a combination of factors. It's the people themselves that need to get the training to come into the industry. It's academia, and even before, in the high school and below level, to give people those skills. And then it's the industry that offers them the appropriate rates and wages to make it worth their while to do that.
Yeah.
It's a combination of things.
What was it?
Well, I mean, you know, there's so many things.
Robotics. I'm sorry, that was the next topic I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, because I mean, yeah, there's so many. This is the fascinating thing about doing this show every week, folks, is that you very quickly after you've done a couple hundred shows, you begin to see how much of this all ties together, and how, you know, a robotics and a graying workforce.
That's what I wanted to touch on. Yeah.
You know, because, you know, when we say skills, we don't just say, you know, you have necessarily a skill to, you know, drill something in. I mean, there's technical, there's mechanical, there's engineering, there's mathematical skills and training that goes into programming some of this stuff.
Well, and we've talked about this with college educators several times. Is that one of the issues is that technology, kind of as we're talking about here, technology grows so fast, moves so quickly, that 1 or 2 years in the technology advancement is light years, right? And yet you've got people going through, whether it's a 2-year vocational program or a 4-year or 6-year college program, that is like so much has changed technology-wise from the time they enter school to the time they leave. And that school may have curriculum that they're using, technology-based curriculum, which is 10 years old. Has nothing to do with the existing technology that's in use in the workforce right now. And it is a problem for schools. I mean, you know, they've got to have their curriculum, they got to have, you know, the on-site equipment in place to teach some of these new skills, whether it's, you know, robotics or whatever. And if they don't have that equipment in place, they can't teach it. Curriculum takes years to change, and yet technology's moving like that.
Well, right? I think that's why it's important. We've seen and reported on things like CMSC and the University of North Carolina Charlotte partnering up on this Precision Path Consortium. You know, to do that, to make sure that the people that are in school are getting the training, the cutting edge training that they need, because these companies are the ones that know what the cutting edge are. The people that are original equipment manufacturers that are putting test and measurement equipment into industry, they're the ones that know, and they're the ones that can provide that training to academia, and the partnership like that makes a lot of sense. We've seen more of that. We've seen the government getting involved too to fund these things, and we're going to see much more of that as we go forward. I mean, you're right, technology changes so fast. I mean, think about additive manufacturing, 3D printing. I mean,
3D printing.
Where were we at 5 years ago?
Yeah, we weren't even talking about 3D printing. It was there, but nobody was talking about it.
We were a little bit, but we didn't. I don't think. I certainly didn't. I don't know if you did. Appreciate the potential ramifications of that for industry, and you know, we began to see over these couple of years how that become very, very core and central to the way manufacturers work today. And this whole idea of, you know, having a low volume, high mix environment has changed radically. I mean, still many, I would probably say most manufacturers in 2011 still were working in a high volume, low mix environment.
And what's even more incredible is the ability to do high volume, high mix, which if you think about it is just mind-blowing, is the ability to have all sorts of different products at high volume and be able to be producing them, you know, kind of simultaneously and switching over and everything. That's part of what 3D printing is going to allow us to do a little bit further in the future. And I don't want to end without talking a little bit about robotics. That's kind of one of my favorite subjects. Is if you look at robotics, I mean, initially, even back in 2011, when you talked about robotics, industrial robots, they typically were walled off industrial robots to avoid harming people. And now pretty much we're starting to turn the bend to get to what's called collaborative robotics, where you have a robot working literally side by side with a human. And there's a lot of research being done is how does that trade-off work? How does a human learn from a robot, of all things, as opposed to a robot being programmed to do a certain thing? Part of a big research being done at schools like MIT is, can the robot watch what you're doing, learn from your actions, and self-adapt to match what your actions are on a production line? I mean, this is crazy stuff, but it's real world stuff and stuff that we weren't talking about 5 years ago. And that's just 5 years. I mean, that's nothing, you know? I mean, it's nothing.
You know, it is. It is nothing. And what brings it home is, when you think about 2021 is tomorrow. I mean, it's so close. And I think about how fast these 5 years have gone. I plan that we're still going to be here in 2021 and bringing you stories like this on Quality Digest Live and talking about it at that point with our 10-year anniversary. Say, wow, can you imagine how much has changed since just 2016, 2017, 2018? You know, I mean, it's just incredible stuff. And thank you all for being part of this journey with us. It's really been a lot of fun. We're going to close the show, but before we do, I want to thank our sponsor. Our sponsors throughout the course of these years have made the show able to be done for us and for you, so we thank all of them en masse. But today we do have a sponsor we want to particularly thank, and that is the Mitutoyo Corporation. They're the world's largest provider of measurement and inspection solutions, offering the most complete selection of machines, sensors, systems, and services, with a line encompassing CMMs, vision, form, and finish measuring machines, as well as precision tools and instruments, and metrology data management software. Mitutoyo's national network of metrology centers and support operations provides application, calibration, service, repair, and education programs to ensure that their more than 6,000 metrology products will deliver measurement solutions for their customers. For more information, visit mitutoyo.com or click on the banner ad just below or just on the right of this video player page.
And before we go out today, we should really want to thank everyone who has contributed to this show for the past 5 years.
Yep.
We've got our intrepid Emmy Award-winning director, Chris Smith, Nicolette Dalpino, Daniel Luna, Cameron Lamers, Dylan Schimmel, Noah Welday, Christopher Martin, Jeff Dewar, Christine Bammert, April Johnson, Taryn March, Laurel Tennis, Ryan Day, Rob Joseph, Haisa Carey, and Kimber Evans. All of those people contributed to making this show a possibility.
Over the course of years, it's been, and every single one of those people had significant things to bring to the show, ideas, stories, suggestions, were on the show. So thank you all for doing that, everybody here at QD and on Chris Smith's team as well. Thank you all for joining us through these 5 years and today as well. It's been a blast. Of course, we look forward to doing it more with you in the next 5. And I have to say, Dirk, buddy,
there we go.
couldn't ask for a better partner.
There you go. Me too, man.
It's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
And we look forward to doing a lot more.
You sure look a lot older.
Yes, we do. Yes,
now
we do.
you look at least like 22.
We do. I'm going to shave next week. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
So long. Bye.